What's up, everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode of the Control Freak Podcast. I am your host, Alex Blackard, or at LessAlex on Twitter, and this is the only Magic the Gathering podcast devoted to all things Control in Modern. So if you like casting Jace the Mind Sculptor, less surgical extractions, and far less rest in pieces out of your sideboard, this is the podcast for you. Today is a very special episode. Obviously, this episode is coming out, at least streaming-wise, on a day where I just put out episode 7. But because of the banned and restricted announcement today, I wanted to get this one out there and get some hot takes off of my chest. I am joined today by Evan Bruce. Evan, how are you doing tonight?
Good. What's going on, man?
Oh, just another day, another banned and restricted announcement, and this one I'm very happy for. Hogak is gone. The name of this episode is...
Whoa. That's misleading. Okay. Hogak itself is not gone.
Hogak itself is not gone. You are correct. But the engine that makes it tick, Bridge from Below, this morning, I woke up at like 9 a.m. The BNR hadn't even been announced yet. So I was waiting.
Oh, you want to talk about waiting? I got up at 7:30 just checking my phone, ready for it.
Just like refresh. So awesome. That is Burning Bridges is the name of this episode. And if you do enjoy this content, make sure to follow, subscribe, and like. It will be on all of the podcast apps. So Podbean, Apple Podcast, Stitcher. What else? Spotify now. It'll be on Spotify. And, of course, this is on Twitch. So if you want to follow me on Twitch at LessAlex. But, yeah, today we are talking all things Hogak, the banning of Bridge from Below. And, Evan, what are your initial thoughts here?
So I have a couple of thoughts around the bannings. First of all, I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions about what should have been banned, because I think everybody realizes Hogak was a problem, unless you're playing Hogak, in which case I'm sorry, but you have to acknowledge it was a problem.
You knew picking up that deck. I'm sorry. There is a couple of people that I know personally that were playing it, but I just want to say I warned them. So
I think realistically, when you have a deck that's roughly... All right, I saw, like, if you read Wizards' post, it was 60% win rate. That's absurd.
Yeah, game 1, I believe, yeah.
That's is insane. Oppressive and absolutely correct when saying it's warping the format.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to look at it through the scope of Blue-White Control specifically, having to play 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4... copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard, like Austin Berzovich did, winning the GP. Also, shout out Austin. That was the first time a blue-white control deck had ever won a Grand Prix Dallas-Fort Worth.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So very sweet. Very sweet.
I mean, not only that, but like it even frees up like people who are playing Surgical's main, like you get to at the very least ease up on your number of them mains. Like you get to like kind of devote those slots back to where we think the format will shift.
Exactly. And I'm here for that, because having 2 Surgical's main, I never went down that route because, again, St. Louis meta is pretty fair. So I never had to do the whole 4 rip 2 Surgicals main. But yeah, if you're going into an open meta, I think it was pretty necessary to either have 2 Surgicals and 4 rips in the sideboard, or just cut all your Snapcaster Mages in the main deck to play Rest in Pieces in the main deck. And that just seemed, you know my thoughts on that. I could never do it.
Yeah, I mean, Snapcaster's real good.
Snapcaster's real good, and special place in my heart. Just a very special place in my heart. Definitely one of my favorite cards. But, yeah, so I want to talk about winners and losers, right? The decks that won because of this banning and the decks that lost because of this banning. And first thing, I just want to get this out of the way. What do you think? Is this archetype just dead? Like, is the best?
Not at all.
So you don't think it's dead? Do you think it is the best?
I think it's
graveyard-centric deck? Like, do you think Dredge now becomes the best option for that, or?
I mean, it depends what you consider a graveyard deck. I think Phoenix is a graveyard deck, and I think it's probably the top graveyard deck. But if you're talking a more traditional graveyard, I think Dredge is. We'll have to see how Hogak evolves, but Hogak and Alter as cards on their own are incredibly powerful. Alter specifically, I have a very hard time seeing it not being somewhere in the format. Like, that is just an incredibly powerful, a free sack outlet.
Yeah.
One is powerful enough on its own. Two, picture that sliding into the Druid combo deck. So all you need is that, Finks, and an Anafenza or a Malira type effect.
Sure.
And it's an infinite mill on the spot.
Did you see that the Vizier decks are starting to play Karn the Great Creator to just
lot of decks are
to just hit you from a whole nother angle? That's actually terrifying to me. As a control player.
That's why I 100% think either Karn or Lattice will get banned sometime in the next 2 years.
2 years? Well, that's a pretty good long run, though. Like,
it may be sooner. I think Hogak took a lot of the pressure or a lot of the spotlight off of Karn and Lattice.
Oh, definitely. Everybody was talking about Lattice. Karn.
Well, and it was fast enough to get under the Karn Lattice lock.
Yeah, very true. I mean, it was very dominant, and you will not see me shed a tear over Bridge, because, I mean, the deck originally when it came out, I mean, people were before Modern Horizons, right? Do you remember the dark days before that?
Yes.
That deck was very powerful, and then of course the format did shift. The problem and the biggest issue, and the reason I think that, and they kind of pointed out in the article, that they ended up banning it so fast, is that decks that typically take over the metagame do it, 5 or even 6 months after the deck has been a known quantity. This was
not instantly.
Dude, right out the gate, off the rip, this deck it won the Modern Challenge. The very first week, it won the freaking Modern Challenge. And
if you look at that list, it's not that far different from what what the most recent lists have been playing.
Wispmare was like the biggest change to the deck in the sideboard. Yeah. So insanity to me. But
just a quick honorable mention. It's not a deck that was one of the biggest losers. Stoneforge Mystic still on the ban list. Still one of the biggest losers of Magic.
F in chat there for old Stoneforge Mystic there, because it's kind of funny because all the memes were coming out about, this deck can go off on turn 2 potentially, but a good old Stoneforge Mystic fetching up a Batterskull's too strong for the format. Like, well, that meme's dead now, but that's like the one negative of this banning, I think, is that meme is dead. So, but so the biggest winners, what in your mind are the biggest winners? Like, in terms of like decks, or just like cards you think are going to see more play?
So the two biggest decks that jump out to me are Tron and Phoenix. For two completely different reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
So Phoenix is going to benefit from less graveyard hate. Obviously, it's going to remain prevalent. Phoenix is still, even in the Hogak era, has been one of the top handful of decks. It's still also one of the top played decks. But as people ease up, just like you said from the beginning, the control decks are going to be able to cut back. So is everything else.
Yeah, and to your point, the deck that won the Red Bull Untapped, the first one, the modern one, was Blue-Red Phoenix. So there you go. I mean, it was still very good, is my point, even in Hogak meta. So
I just don't. I think it definitely will benefit from less graveyard interaction. Not only that, but they get to trim their graveyard interaction,
yeah.
which frees up their sideboard a lot more. Like people were starting to commit 3 and 4 ravenous traps, up to 3 surgicals, sometimes main. Like you get a lot more flexibility. Um, the other one I think is Tron, and I think Tron for the first time in a while had kind of met its match. Like we had seen it evolve to to fight these other decks that had popped up, and like Tron never really was bad.
Oh no.
Hogak made Tron
I
bad,
mean, they've printed so many cards in the last like 3 years to try and kill Tron, and it's just never gonna happen.
but it never felt like Tron. And maybe like I'm not a Tron player.
Right.
Maybe some Tron players out there have had different experiences, but from what I've seen on camera and from what articles I've read, it was an abysmal matchup for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's a deck that wins on turn 3, or it just kills you by like turn 4 with attacking, right? So it either has an alter combo on turn 3 or 4, or just kills you by like turn 3, 4, or 5, right? So
Yeah.
with just infinite zombies, pretty much. So also, one of my biggest winners is definitely Blue White Control, because it is the second highest represented deck, right, in the meta.
Blue White is?
Blue White is, yeah. As of last week. Now I'm looking here at Goldfish, and it's a little bit lower since the most recent 5-0 list. But looking at the Brussels Untapped tournament, it was the second highest represented next to Hogak. So,
I mean, I think part of that is the deck was very adept at fighting Hogak because it was able to fight on a lot of different angles that the average deck couldn't interact with.
yeah. At Brussels, the metagame breakdown was 15.7% Bridgevine and 11.0% Blue White Control.
It doesn't surprise me. That's awesome, though.
And Is It Phoenix was 7.6, and then Impact was 7.1. So that would definitely leave me to believe.
That's a deck that probably gets a lot, too.
Yeah, Impact is kind of been always kind of there in the corner, but of course Scale Up it was printed just recently, and now there's no other like quicker deck really. I mean, turn 2 deck,
yeah,
which Scale Up could make that deck become
Scale Up makes that deck terrifying.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely gives it the power to make it tier 1 again.
So what, other than obviously Hogak,
yeah.
What else seems like it's going to lose anything from this?
My biggest loser in terms of decks, like overall decks, is the green-white Devoted Devastation deck. Because that really beat up on the Hogak decks. Because the Hogak decks don't have any interaction at all.
Right.
Like, really. I mean, they don't play like Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt or anything like that.
No, they play like, what, 1 or 2 trophies in the board?
Yeah, which, sure, whatever. That's in the board.
Right.
Green-white wants to win game 1 and then, at least find a way to win game 2 or 3. So,
right.
It looks like this one here that I'm looking at from the Team Open played 2 Fatal Push in the sideboard, and 1 Lightning Axe main. That's it in terms of like actual removal spells. So 3 removal spells total. So I definitely think that deck is gonna take a bit of a hit just because it was so good against beating Hogak.
Do you think it can adapt itself to stay as competitive outside of Hogak?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it is starting to adopt the Karn. Like that was a thing that at the Untapped tournament. And by the way, what I'm talking about is the Red Bull Untapped series that they're doing. Red Bull's putting a bunch of money up, and yeah, that's what tournament I'm referring to when I'm talking about Untapped. But they have offline and online, and the offline was modern over the weekend. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the deck is starting to play Karn, the Great Creator, with Lattice, and I mean that just seems like another angle. In specifically talking about Blue Eye Control, Blue Eye Control and Devoted Devastation initially was kind of a coin flip, but you could deal with them because they are a creature-based combo deck. You could just like run them up the ladder and like path, oust the thing, verdict when you need it. As long as you kept a solid hand against them, you could definitely go toe to toe with them. Now that they have this whole other angle that they're crashing into you from the side, it's kind of rough. It's kind of rough, actually, for blue-white specifically.
Do you think more Karns in the format means more Force of Negation seems better for blue-white right now? Like, is that the best axis to fight it on?
That is definitely a good question. The fact that typically Karn comes down on turn 3 or 4, right? I don't know if more Force Negations is the option, because we were only playing 2, right? We were only playing 2
Or
main
maybe
and one side when we were trying to stop a turn 2 altar of Dementia,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know if necessarily going up on Force Negation is really the
What about
issue,
something like
or the
Archmage's
answer,
Charm?
rather. What's that? Archmage's Charm?
Yeah. Like I'm saying as a possible alternative to fight
Yeah,
Karns.
that was one of the cards in my episode about Modern Horizons that I was pretty high on.
Right.
That it could be an option as a one of in the deck, but at least in Hogak meta, not a shot. You're playing a 3 mana counterspell like that isn't Force of Negation, right?
Right.
Let me clarify that. But it's possible. I just think in that slot you probably just want Factor Fiction. It serves a little bit different of a purpose, but I think overall,
I mean,
Factor
it's a
Fiction,
flex slot.
yeah, it's definitely a flex slot, and it can definitely pull you back a lot harder. Like, have you ever had Factor Fiction with 3 planeswalkers and a Path to Exile and one land, and they're just like, oh well, I have no, and you know you have a Snapcaster Mage in hand, like it's just gas. That card is very good as a one of, I believe.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to have that card in the
that
format.
card's no joke.
Yeah, it is as good as I thought it was going to be. That's for sure. Which is perfectly. I don't even think that it's a flex spot at this point. Like I would lock that in all my 75s, no matter what the meta was, unless something changed so much that we're trying to again prevent a turn 3 win via creatures. I just have to have that card in my deck because it does pull you back. The first time I cast it, I thought this is kind of a win more card, like the first couple times, but it's pulled me back from a lot of games. So,
I believe that.
What about you? What are some big losers for you?
I think the decks that were trying to compete with Hogak in a non-reactive way. So something like Jeskai Copycat, which like I understand isn't a huge fringe deck, but it was seeing more play.
Yeah.
I think that was starting to see more play because of the Hogak environment. But I think that's something that's probably going to take a hit.
Yeah.
I think Infect, it could be a toss-up. Like, as I've been sitting here thinking about it, like, the more reactive decks get better,
Yeah.
and the more reactive decks get better, the worse Infect is.
Sure. If you're playing more pass and more fatal pushes, then it gets worse probably. So yeah,
Right.
I agree with that. Even though it's not necessarily like you don't have Hogak overshadowing it, right, as like the best
Right.
like turn 3 deck or turn 2 deck.
Right.
Maybe it just does take a hit because more fair decks. And I mean, Jund is back with a vengeance. I mean, Ren in 6.
Season Season Pyromancer and
Yes.
Run in 6 made Jund a lot better.
It was always like you would bring in like one, maybe two rest in pieces against them. And maybe sometimes, depending upon what they were playing, you might not even bring it in. Now, you have to bring them in. I had an opponent the other day with Ren and 6 in play get back their peatland and crack it every single turn. He drew an extra card for 4 straight turns. Needless to say, I did not win that game. Um,
Yeah. I've seen Jundek starting to play a Ghost Quarter specifically because of Run in
oh my god,
6.
that is disgusting.
Like I saw someone on stream Ghost Quarter 3 turns in a row.
Yeah, that's really good. That's
And
like
like
old school blue white tech.
well and
With
like out like that's such like Jund hasn't been able to compete on like that style of
that
magic
axis, yeah.
outside, right, like outside of Fulminator, and like being able to have a more reliable, more reusable, consistent version of that is insane.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. In the fact that there was a 7-1 deck, a 7-1 Jund deck that went in the Modern Challenge, had 4 Ren and 6. I mean, this card's a problem for blue white control.
Yeah, it
Like
is.
2 mana, like you thought that Liliana of the Veil was a must counter. Them being able to like get all of their lands out of their deck and just always have gas, because like one of the positives in the Jund matchup for blue white specifically was like late game our haymakers are typically better than theirs.
Oh, absolutely.
But when we're drawing lands every other turn and they're never drawing lands because they've used Ren and 6 to pretty much fetch all of their lands out of their deck, not all of them, but most of them, the card quality is insane, right? I would say that Ren and 6 is getting back a land and cracking it is like worth maybe half a draw, like half a card, right?
Yeah, Ren in 6 I will say is a lot better than I gave it credit for out of like from
Out of
the
the
beginning.
gates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there were a lot of good players telling me that Ren and 6 was the best card in the set. And
And I also heard that. I couldn't see it.
um, it looked like good, like a 2 mana planeswalker that actually does something, unlike Tibalt. um,
Whoa. Whoa.
whoa, shots fired. No, but it looked good. It looked like it had potential, but I still, for my money, I will fight this till the bitter end. Force Negation is the best card in the set. For my money. Granted, I am a little biased. We are on the Control
Yeah.
Freak podcast after all, but um,
Season Pyromancer's in that conversation for me too.
Season Pyromancer is very good as well. Um,
It has overperformed
yeah,
when I've seen it.
the card is very good, and another another deck that I want to talk about that is going to take a hit is the Mardu Death Shadow deck. Have you Did
Yeah.
you see this thing at
I mean, it's a
at
sweet
the
list.
Open?
Like, I have enjoyed like seeing Death Shadow back in the format. I think Death Shadow is healthy for the format.
Oh yeah, and Ranger Captain of Eos is as advertised. Like I figured it
Yeah,
would be
card's
great,
insane.
and it is very strong. But yeah, I mean this deck. So I'm looking at it. It got first
Dreadhorde
place.
Arcanus is awesome.
Oh yeah, Dreadhorde Arcanus kind of came out of left field for me. I really not the best at evaluating red cards. I'll be honest on that one.
That's
But
fair. I
but
mean, every spell in this deck costs 1 mana.
yeah, which is insane with Dreadhorde Arcanus. But it did take first at the SCG Team Open in Pittsburgh last weekend, and Jeremy Bertaroni, sorry if I butchered that, but he was the fellow that was piloting the Mardu deck, and he apparently did not drop a game day one, and he played against pretty much all Hogak from what Twitter was telling me. So it's just it has to be true, right? Like if Hogak's gone and you beat up on that deck, like it's got to be worse, right?
I mean, I think the benefit of playing a Death Shadow deck is it's very malleable to the format. So like
That is true.
you get to cut back on the spell bombs and the surgicals that he has made, and I think you can make some pretty light, like I think you could easily slide those into bolts.
Bolts or even unearths, so you could play more unearths.
Yeah, like I think you just watch to see the way the meta shifts. Same thing, like if you look at their sideboard, you get to clear away those 4 Yixlid jailers.
Yeah,
Like
that
you probably play 1 or 2 graveyard, like those probably become ley lines because you don't need the turn
which
2
ley line?
Yixlid. Ley line of the void.
Sure.
Like I don't think like the whole benefit of Yixlid Jailer was it was a you had multiple ways to turn 2 put it into play.
Yeah. And the
Um,
fact that you could actually cast it earlier than turn 4 is
right. But I don't think because you won't need that speed now. Like you probably I don't know. You may still keep Jailer, but I don't think you need it as a 4 of
no,
now.
definitely not a 4 of them. Definitely don't need 2 surgicals. I don't think any deck should really be playing 2 surgicals. Surgical's like the most overboarded card, just like ever, right? Because
I mean,
it
yeah,
could technically go in against pretty much everything, but
with a
um,
few exceptions, I agree.
yeah, I don't think it's particularly good. People keep it in against blue white. I don't think it's very good against blue white because like we have like at most 3 ofs, and most of our cards are 2 and 1 ofs,
Yeah,
except
but
for like path, right? But
I mean, I feel like you want to, anytime you can take any deck, but especially blue white, off of some form of way to interact with you, that gives you an opening.
sure, that gives you an out. Yeah,
Like if I take all of your cryptics, like I know I have
it's something you
these
don't have.
more options.
Yeah, and it's something you don't have to play around.
Right.
That would make
Like
sense.
it's one of those where it's like it's my like 59th or 60th card where if I have cards that are much better than it, it'll be in my sideboard.
Sure, sure. But yeah, I do think, in general, generally speaking, this deck does get worse just because. I mean, logic just tells me that, right?
Yeah.
If it beat up on the deck, then it's got to be significantly worse. And can we talk about faithless looting for a second? That card has been dodging bans left and right.
That and Ancient Stirrings are like best friends at this point.
Right? Just the 2 menaces that anytime there's an issue in Modern, it is because of one of those 2. And I guess you could throw Mox Opal in there. Just like those 3 cards, anytime there's like a deck that like
That's
gets
impressive.
banned, yeah, gets banned and is oppressive so much that it does get banned. It's one of
Has
those
one of
3.
those 3,
It's one of
yeah.
those 3. Oh man.
100%.
Like KCI was Mox Opal and Ancient Stirrings, and then now with Hogak, Bridgevine, Faithless Looting, definitely uh,
I
skirting the banhammer, right?
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about, like, we'll see these pre-established decks rise and fall as we settle from Hogak, but we haven't really explored Modern Horizons yet. Like,
Yeah,
everything got overshadowed by Hogak. So, like, I'm really curious now that that won't be the forefront of the format. What will that open up for the rest? Like, will we get to see the Astral? Is it Slide? Or is that the old one?
um, that's the old one. I can't remember the name of the card, but sure, it's the Astral
But,
Slide. It's the
yeah, like,
Astral
will we
Slide
get to
deck.
see the cycling deck?
Maybe it's
Uh,
possible. I mean,
like, does this slow the format down enough? Or, like, does Phoenix and Infect still keep that out? Like, I'm just curious to see, like, we saw snow-covered theme decks.
Dude,
running around at release. Like,
speaking of snow, I think the Grixis Urza deck
yeah,
does get better.
that deck
Because,
I think is very close to being very real.
well, I mean, it did top 8, I believe,
Kansas, where it was my friend
the
Brian Boss.
well, it also top 8 the Grand Prix in Dallas.
That's it.
Um,
Yeah, that is Brian Boss. He's
well,
a friend of
this one
mine.
was
Someone else may
Justin
have.
Porcas. Sorry again if I butchered the name. I apologize. Um, but yeah, I mean, this thing is sick, and I love me a good prison control deck, and this thing is right in my wheelhouse. When I'm not playing control, boy howdy do I love some prison. Um, but this thing just looks good. It looks like it can fight all the fair decks, right? Like
Oh,
this thing just
this this
stomps
thing.
fair decks, right?
I mean, we're playing a Spine of Isha.
Oh my god, that card. Oh, that card. Yeah, there it is. Oh my god.
You
Yeah,
know
and
what
then
I
it
think
just has a
is
combo potential, and then it just makes a million blockers to find its win condition, right? Like
is it ironic to anyone else that it's not playing Karn? Like the artifact deck not playing
doesn't play
Karn.
Karn. Yeah. um.
Uh, but I think this deck is very real. I think it's very good. Uh, but like, if I don't know, if I was a new player, I'd be, or not a new player, but like if I was looking to get into a deck in Modern,
Yeah.
I'd be very nervous of touching Mox Opal.
You know, since we've been talking about bans all night, I don't think they'll ever ban Mox Opal. It's just it would have to be something very like, so think about it. KCI was busted, and everybody hated playing against that deck because it just had weird, just terrible game mechanics, and it led to poor
Right.
play patterns. And it still didn't get a ban, right? Like, what more degeneracy does has to happen for that card to get
Something
banned?
something like Hogak. Like it would take a deck.
I mean, KCI was kind of the artifact version
It
of
wasn't.
Hogak. It wasn't as
It
fast.
wasn't a 60% win rate on turn
No,
2.
you are right there, but
Like that's like I'm saying it would
I think
take
it was in
that
like the
kind of,
55 percentile though. Like, it was very high.
but it wasn't turn 2.
Definitely wasn't turn 2, but it was
Like
turn
don't get
3
me
pretty.
wrong, it was terrible and oppressive,
Yeah,
but I think Hogak was more consistent and worse.
yeah.
But I think it would take something like a Hogak style deck powered by Mox Opal, it'll get the hammer.
I guess, but I think that they might just go ahead and ban something like the new toy that made that deck busted, right?
Maybe, I don't know. It benefits from the same thing Faithless Looting does, in that it is a very widely used card, and Wizards wants to affect the least amount of decks
Yeah.
possible.
That's one thing. So I put a poll up on my Twitter at LesAlex the day before the ban, so like last night, and I had 28 votes on it. So I put up, what's the card that's going to get banned, right? What is it going to be? Looting. There was 4 options: looting, Hogak, altar, or bridge. I've been saying, and I'm on wax. Like, you can go back to my past episodes. The episode 7 with Francesco Neo Amati. I said it was gonna be bridge, because it's the one that scalpel precision. That's the one it's gonna be, because altar's a sweet card, like a fun brewer's card, right?
Yeah.
And Hogak kind of fits into not John, fits into Dredge as like a
Right.
2 of, maybe a 1 of, maybe a 2 of. And they're both new, right? Wizards doesn't want to have another black eye on their, or like another F on their report card, because when they made Modern Masters, the one that had Splinter Twin in it,
Yep.
a month and a half later they banned Splinter Twin. That's super awkward. Nobody wants that,
Right.
Like, I just don't know. I don't know. And I kind of trailed off and went on a journey like I tend to do, but yeah, I basically put this poll up there, and a lot of people said it was going to be Alter because
I
in,
think that's the most degenerate card. Like, of those four, I think that opens the most possibility to the most degeneracy in the format.
I I don't necessarily disagree with that, but my point in my argument that it should have been Bridge is Bridge doesn't do anything on the battlefield. It is
Correct.
it's an interesting card. Don't get me wrong. From a design point, like the puzzle, like the Zach Galifianakis gif in my mind is just like going
Yeah.
off. Like, how do we get this thing in the graveyard and how do we bust this thing? Well, guess what? We figured out how to bust it, and it was busted in half. And good riddance. I'm sorry if you played that deck, but you knew what. Like, to be honest, though, a lot of people knew what they were getting into. They were just playing
sure.
it to get their win rate up, right? Or to spike a tournament and make a couple $1,000, which I don't hate. Like, do you? That's great. But to say that
it served its purpose.
Yeah, it served its purpose. It was who we thought it was, right? And obviously Hogak and Alter pushed it over the edge. But my main point is, I don't think Wizards wanted to ban a card that they just printed. It just looks bad. At the end of the day, it just looks bad, right?
I agree 100%.
And Francesco actually thought it was going to be Alter as well. In that episode, if you go back and listen to episode 7, he said he thought it was going to be Alter, and I kind of stopped him and said, well, and he said it was the engine that made it go. I was like, well, if you think about it, Bridge being in the graveyard is the thing that gives you all the zombies, that helps you mill all the cards, that keeps the wheels, rolling. And by the end of the episode, he agreed with me.
Well, and to your point, they said in the Wizards article about why they chose what they chose. They talked about how it's complete lack of other need of resource was a huge like you're talking about, like you don't need to cast it, you don't do anything with it, you just dump it in your graveyard.
It's free. It's free to do. All you need is a way to get it in the graveyard, and of course, Faithless Looting was right there at the plate, on deck, ready to knock it out of the park. It's funny
how these cards work so well together.
Yeah, it's like 15 years of game design, and something's gonna break every once in a while. Initially, though, I was very critical of Wizards of the Coast for making Hogak and making Alter. Looking back, I listened to the Game podcast, and Brian Gottlieb put it into kind of perspective. It's better to have to ban something than the cards that they print not even affect the format, right?
I agree with that.
At first, I was like, man, Wizards can't do anything right. And they...
Looking at you, everybody who got a toothbrush.
What's that?
Looking at everybody who got a toothbrush.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, man, that was
the foil sheets.
So that's actually something that is very regional. So for the listeners outside of America, and specifically outside of Missouri, so instead...
Was that only a Missouri
Yes,
thing?
it was only like a Midwest thing. Yeah.
What?
So apparently, here's the story. If you went and tried to get a Mythic Edition for War of the Spark, and you didn't receive it, right, they were to send you a free foil sheet, rare and mythic foil sheet from War of the Spark. Now, a bunch of people I know in Missouri, because we're from St. Louis, we're based out of St. Louis, a lot of them got toothbrushes. And apparently the story, yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre, right?
Sorry for anybody out there who got one and it doesn't find it funny.
It's hilarious. I'm sorry, it's hilarious. But yeah, they got toothbrushes, and apparently the story goes it was like just one group of employees for Hasbro, and it was like one number off, right? The
barcode.
The style number, right? So they sent these out And like some of them were apparently like Transformers. So it makes sense, right? Because that's a Hasbro IP.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's bizarre, really. Like they all got a lot of people I know got toothbrushes. Um, one of my buddies was like, "Yeah, my sister called me and told me that I had a package." He's like, "Oh yeah, what was it? Like what shape was it?" He's like, "It's a small box." He's like, "Oh, that's not right. I got the toothbrush, boys." So yeah, instead of a big tube, it's a small box. So
Yeah.
that was kind of a little bizarre thing, but no, I'm happy that Wizards pushed the envelope on this one. Did they break the format? Yes. They fixed it though, so kudos to them. And sorry to everyone that was playing the deck and is now not playing the deck.
Just pick up Dredge.
Dredge, I think, is still going to be very strong.
Oh, yeah.
Dredge and Phoenix were the two best decks before Hogak. Arguably, you could put
It depends
you
on
could
the
put
week.
Death
You could put
Shadow.
any number of
Yeah,
decks
you could put Death
in that
Shadow, and you
category.
could, of course, put
I think Blue
Blue
White definitely
White.
has its weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things too, where man, Blue White was doing so well in this meta. It kind of makes me a little nervous to see, a little anxious to see what's going to follow, right?
Eh, Blue White will always find a way to adapt.
I definitely agree with that. But you said you think that there might be a way that Hogak kind of stays around. Like
I mean,
how? I'm just
I
curious on
think
how.
I don't know what it'll look like. There are deck builders much better than me,
Sure.
but I think the combination of Hogak and Alter still leaves a lot of power to just be thrown aside completely. You
True.
know,
And you still do
I
have Carrion Feeder.
I mean, the only thing you're losing, like I don't think it functions as a combo deck as much as becoming um, this graveyard-based value deck. Like maybe you look at taking advantage of sacrificing creatures with something like um, what's the 01 vampire that drain and gain when a creature dies? Blood
Sure.
Artist.
Blood Artist. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like maybe it becomes that style deck with Hogak as its finisher. Uh, like there's still maybe you add prized amalgam
So we're playing
and
Dredge.
but with alter.
Sure.
Like and maybe not. Maybe it forms into a different iteration, but like both of those cards are powerful enough that I see them finding some kind of home.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It'll be interesting. I think just the de facto like graveyard based deck is going to be Dredge, and I think a lot of people are going to migrate back there because I think, in my opinion, Hogak slots perfectly into that deck. Like instead of playing all of these just like weird, like 3/3s and 2/1s, you just
I
get
mean,
a huge beater.
Hogak is really good with prized amalgam. Like it's a way more consistent way to return it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, do you have any other thoughts on the Hogak banning? Like, what are you gonna play heading? I know you're not
I mean,
devoted to the Azorius guild like I am, but
I'm gonna keep playing Degeneracy, and I'm just gonna keep playing Phoenix.
Phoenix, it's not so degenerate.
Uh,
I don't think. I think that deck is
Aria
fine.
Flame is the most underrated card in Modern Horizons.
I think people are starting to come around because a lot of people are starting to play it as a 3 of.
The
Um,
card's insane. Like I, myself included, I completely underestimated that card.
yeah,
Uh, but it's been insane. The deck's sweet. Finale of Promise is sweet. Like,
yeah.
well,
Alex Bestecki, who at the team open got second. He was playing 3 Aria Flames in his list, and then his teammate James Magus also played 3.
yeah,
So
card's bonkers.
cards bonkers. So yeah, everyone, thanks for hanging out with us. If you're watching live on Twitch, definitely appreciate you. Sorry for the dropped frames. And if you are listening to this on podcasts, any podcast app, definitely like, follow, subscribe. Go on over to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star review and some kind words about the podcast. And of course, follow me on Twitter at LesAlex. If you enjoy the content, just tell your friends about it. That is the main way that you can help support the podcast.
You guys should do that. This definitely worth listening to.
Appreciate that, especially now that you're on it. You're like, yeah.
Oh yeah, everyone listen to this one.
But yeah, follow Evan Bruce on Twitter at BoSoxBoy, or don't. I mean, you don't tweet much. It's not much. You're not very in the MTG Twitter verse.
Not much.
Yeah. But yeah, everybody, thanks everyone. And this has been episode 8 of the Control Freak podcast. Burning Bridges. Once again, Bridge from Below has been banned from Modern. This will be posted Sunday night going into Monday morning next week because we are recording it Monday on the 8th, the day of the banning. I wanted to get just hot takes and I wanted our thoughts to be fresh, right? I wanted it to be not have to recall things. So that's why we recorded so back to back. Like I recorded on Friday and now I'm recording on Monday. I just wanted to get things out there. But yeah, everyone, thanks. Evan, what you got to say to the people?
Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys around.
All right, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night, and be kind to one another, Magic players.